Henry VIII, the Tyrant King of England, read and published by Mr. Books. Few figures in the annals of history have cast so long and dark a shadow as Henry VIII, King of England. Even now, centuries after his death, the very name Henry stirs in the heart of England a maelstrom of fear, fascination, and fury. He is remembered not merely as a monarch, but as an icon of tyranny, whose passionate desires and insatiable ambitions forever altered a kingdom, and indeed a continent. Born into the resplendent halls of the Tudor dynasty, Henry seemed destined for greatness. Handsome and athletic, intelligent and charismatic, he appeared at first as England's golden prince, an ideal Renaissance king who would enlighten and strengthen his nation. Yet appearances, as the world soon learned, can be seductive and fatally deceptive. Within the heart of this vibrant young man, the seeds of darkness were ever present, and as the years unfurled their pages, those seeds blossomed into acts that would drench a nation in sorrow and awe. Henry's reign was marked not by peace, but by upheaval. His quest for a son, his burning need to control both crown and church, left in their wakes ruined families, broken bodies, and orphaned faiths. 6 wives passed through his shadowed embrace, victims and victors in a cruel and perilous game. Friends became foes, counselors became corpses, and the sword and the flame silenced the choir of saints that once sang in England's cathedrals. Yet Henry was more than a monster. He was a man of wrenching complexity, capable of love as fierce as his rage, of patronage as lavish as his punishments were cruel. He forged the Church of England from the ashes of papal rule, tearing apart the spiritual heart of his land. To some, he brought enlightenment. To others, endless night. This book charts the emotional agony and soaring hauteur of Henry's story, from his sunlit boyhood to his embittered, bloated end. We will walk the echoing corridors of Whitehall, tremble in the Tower, and linger beside the blood-stained scaffold. Through each triumph and tragedy, we will seek understanding, not excuse. For in knowing the Tyrant King, we come to know the perilous power of unchecked will and the haunting cost of a realm ruled by a single wounded heart. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button to support the channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an audiobook that could change your life now. Let's begin. Enjoy. Chapter 1. The Making of a Monarch. Henry's Early Years. To truly comprehend the turbulent reign and tyrannical soul of Henry VIII, we must begin at the dawn, within the gilded cradle of his childhood. Born on the 28th of June, 1491, at the Palace of Placentia in Greenwich, Henry Tudor entered the world swathed in privilege and expectation. His father, Henry VII, had forged the Tudor dynasty out of the ashes of the Wars of the Roses, and every heartbeat of young Henry pulsed with the burden of legacy. Portraits of the adolescent. Henry revealed a boy, radiant with promised golden curls, a princely brow, a broad chest even in youth. He was not, however, raised as heir, for the hopes of England rested first with his older brother, Arthur. Henry existed in a world of secondary expectation, a spare piece in the great game of dynastic chess. This freedom, however, allowed him a boyhood less constrained by looming responsibility. He immersed himself in the arts, mastering the lute and composing melancholy songs that spoke, even then, of longing and hidden heartache. Yet the shadow of the crown lingered at the edge of his life, reminding young Henry that his destiny, however improbable, might one day call him to the throne. As the second son, he was guided toward the church, a fate perhaps ill-suited to his tempestuous heart. It was in the company of scholars, priests, and courtiers that Henry's mind blossomed, absorbing the boldest ideas of the Renaissance. He spoke Latin with ease, read philosophy, and debated with the finest minds of his generation. His education was as broad as it was deep, laying the seeds for both greatness and grievance. The turning point in Henry's youth came in 1502 with the sudden and tragic death of Prince Arthur. The Tudor court, weighed down by grief, faced the grim prospect of instability. The eyes of the nation, and of history itself, swung inexorably to the young Henry. At 11, he became not merely a prince, but the heir to England's uncertain future. Gone was the lingering freedom of the second son. Now every lesson, every gesture, every mistake would be judged as the preparation of a king. The loss of Arthur also meant that Henry's life would intersect fatefully with another Arthur's young widow, Catherine of Aragon. Raised in the devout, proud court of Spain, Catherine would become the first of Henry's 6 wives and embody both the hopes and tragedies of a dynasty in the making. Their story began innocence, yet would end in devastation, a foreshadowing of the years of sorrow ahead. Even as a boy, Henry possessed a hunger that set him apart. He was obsessed with chivalry, with grandeur, with the image of the heroic king. He excelled in jousts and tournaments, displaying a dangerous resilience and vanity. When he entered a room, courtiers felt the air shift as if a storm were approaching. That magnetic charisma both dazzled and disarmed, but beneath it lurked a growing impatience with any will but his own. His father, ever the cautious manipulator, shielded Henry from public life, keeping him under tight surveillance and seldom allowing him to step beyond the court. Henry VII's reign had been one of suspicion and thrift, haunted endlessly by enemies real and imagined. The young prince watched his father grow old and cold, absorbing both his cunning and his caution. Within these formative years, Henry's emotional landscape was being sculpted, ambition alloyed with anxiety, and love twisted with the fear of loss. The future king learned that family could die, that trust could wither, that power was as fragile as gold leaf. He was shaped by spectacle, but haunted by shadows. It was these wounds, half-healed, handwritten that Henry would carry on to the throne, and into the souls of all who would dare to love or serve him. In Henry's earliest days, the seeds of greatness and tyranny were planted side by side. The world was yet unaware of the storm that would break upon England with his coronation. The story of the boy king had begun bright, beautiful, and already tinged with the tragic darkness yet to come. Chapter 2: Ascension to Power, the Dawn of a New Reign. When the torch of kingship finally passed to Henry VIII on the death of his father in April 1509, England exhaled a collective sigh of relief mingled with expectation. Gone was Henry VII's sullen age of suspicion, of whispers in shadowed halls, and of watchful paranoia. The new king was just 17, vibrant, handsome, and exuding the untamed promise of youth. The court flowered, the people feasted, and hope once again bloomed beneath the long-shadowed towers of Westminster. Henry ascended the throne with a lover's zeal, delighting in the pageantry and power now wholly his. The coronation, lavish beyond measure, announced to Europe that a new sovereign ruled a rejuvenated England. In these first heady months, Henry seemed to fulfill every golden prophecy. A prince, scholar, poet, athlete, and warrior. Few could have guessed the darkness that would soon seep, slow and sure, into the heart of his rule. Henry's first acts as king were determined to endear him to both nobility and commoners. He purged his father's deeply unpopular ministers, Empson and Dudley, publicly condemning their greed and coldness. The executions that followed were cheered as acts of justice, but beneath the celebration, Henry discovered a dark delight in the exercise of mortal power. Mercy could be his or a sword, and his will alone. Marriage to Catherine of Aragon quickly followed, uniting not just two youthful sovereigns, but two titanic dynasties. The early years of their marriage radiated hope. Catherine was beloved, wise, and at least for a time fertile. Yet in the shadows of their love, pressure mounted. The need for a male heir, an obsession inherited, whole from his father, became the unspoken torment haunting their dreams. Despite the gilded mask, Henry's court was a cauldron of ambitions. Rival factions vied for favor. From the low-born Thomas Wolsey, who rose dazzlingly as Henry's cardinal and chief advisor, to the traditional Howard and Boleyn nobles, no one's place was secure. Henry reveled in this storm, encouraging competition, sowing jealousy, and demanding absolute obedience. His laughter, the courtier observed, could turn to rage in an instant. Still, in these sunlit years, there was energy and marvel. Henry invited the pageantry of Europe to his court, entertaining foreign ambassadors with tournaments and feasts, rivaling those of Arthur's mythical Camelot. England's king was the envy of the continent. Poets extolled his virtue, noblewomen courted his gaze, and Europe's princes feared his will. Yet beneath the silvered surface, seeds of doubt and tyranny took root. Henry's need for control, his suspicion of disloyalty, his growing impatience. With restraint all quietly fermented. The deaths of his infants, the increasingly strained marriage, the ever-present threat from rival claimants, each was a tiny cut to his golden confidence. Craving glory, Henry soon turned to war. The campaign against France in 1513, though costly and inconclusive, was paraded as a triumph, with Henry magnified as the new Agincourt hero. But the trappings of victory could not mask the havoc war wrought on England's treasury and people. Still, the king pressed on, ever hungry for validation, for legacy. The dawn of the new reign, so luminous with hope and music, was already flickering with darker ambitions. Trust and tenderness, so beautifully promised in youth, began to give way to the sharp edges of doubt and command. In Henry's soul, the tyrant waited, patient and certain, for his moment to seize the crown in truth, not by birthright, but by iron will. Thus began Henry's transformation, from beloved prince to the unchecked tyrant who would shake England to its bones. Chapter 3. A Realm in Chains. The Rise of Tyranny. By the second decade of Henry's rule, the golden glow of his early years had begun to tarnish. The once beloved king now grew restless, dissatisfied with even the glories of war and the fealty of his court. Beneath the velvet and gold of the Tudor court, a shadow uncoiled, a shadow named tyranny. The need for an heir had become an open wound. Catherine, so revered and gracious, failed time and again to deliver a living son. Each failed pregnancy, carving another groove in Henry's restless heart. The court, as ever, whispered, was Catherine cursed? Was the Tudor line doomed to wither? Each unanswered question stoked Henry's anxieties and hardened his resolve. Suspicion became the king's constant companion. He watched his nobles, his court, his wife with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Those who failed to flatter, to obey, to worship, fell swiftly from grace. The Tower of London, its walls stained with centuries of despair, became busier than ever. Prisoners, once noble and proud, now waited in dread for the dawn, unsure whether pardon or execution would be their fate. Henry's dependence on strongmen deepened. Thomas Wolsey, master of manipulation, was his first instrument of power. Wolsey carried out Henry's will with relentless efficiency, enriching the crown, silencing opposition, arranging treaties, and punishing all who threatened the king's supremacy. But even Wolsey could not escape the fate of all favorites. When the cardinal failed in the king's great quest annulment from Catherine, his fate was sealed. The king's gratitude, like his love, burned brightly, but could freeze to ice in a single night. The king's search for a new queen, and a new future soon centered on Anne Boleyn, a woman whose wit and allure matched his own, and awakened in Henry both romance and ruthless ambition. To secure Anne, he would defy popes and kings, rip England from Rome, and spill rivers of blood. This was no longer chivalric love, but the love of a man intoxicated by his desires. Love that would shake the world. As the king's authority expanded, so too did his appetite for absolute control. Those who opposed him, whether for religious, political, or personal reasons, found their loyalty shredded, and their heads often severed from their bodies. Parliament bent its knee, the feudal lords swallowed their pride, and the common folk watched with uneasy awe as the age of the tyrant dawned. The creation of the Church of England was not just a religious revolution. It was an act of personal dominion. Henry became head of church as well as state, bending both scripture and tradition to his unbending will. He seized monastic lands, filling his coffers and shattering centuries-old institutions. Monks and martyrs perished, and a river of gold and blood washed through the kingdom. Violence became Henry's language, and terror his tool. Rebellions, most notably the Pilgrimage of Grace, were crushed with chilling violence. Resistance, no matter how justified, was branded as treason, punishable by death. No one was safe, not even those once favored. Thomas More, Henry's friend and chancellor, faced the axe for conscience's sake. The lesson was clear. All must bow or all must fall. Beneath Henry's tyranny, England's heart beat on a heart sick with fear, yet unable to turn away from its master. For to defy him was death, and to serve him was to risk not only one's life, but one's very soul. The king was no longer a hero, but storm devastating, inescapable, electrifying. England, once hopeful, was now a realm in chains, struggling for breath beneath the heel of the tyrant king. Chapter 4, Love, Betrayal, and Blood. The Wives of Henry VIII. If Henry VIII's reign was a tempest, its fiercest winds blew through the 6 extraordinary women he would take as his queens. Each was drawn into the royal orbit by love or ambition, and each would be dashed against its merciless rocks. Through these marriages, passion, betrayal, and blood would etch their story in the annals of English tragedy. Catherine of Aragon was crowned in hope and devotion, a Spanish princess whose piety could not shield her from the agony of repeated miscarriages and the heartbreak of a son who died in infancy. For 2 decades, Catherine was the steadfast anchor of Henry's world, her grace and intelligence shining over the realm. But as hope for an heir faded, love turned to resentment, and Henry's eyes strayed. The marriage that began with triumph and joy ended in humiliation. As Catherine was cast aside, her title stripped, her daughter Mary declared illegitimate, and her world reduced to lonely exile and prayer. The new son in Henry's heaven was Anne Boleyn, a woman of wit, fire, and enigmatic allure. She held out against the king's advances, insisting on marriage over mere dalliance. For Anne, Henry would break with Rome, risk excommunication, and plunge England into schism. Their love, so urgent and electric, curdled quickly under the weight of expectation. Anne's sharp tongue, political ambitions, and above all, her failure to bear a son, taught Henry the bitter taste of disappointment. In a calamitous court drama, Anne was arrested, accused of adultery and incest, and executed by sword. Her last words a tragic melody to a love gone monstrous. Jane Seymour, soft-spoken and serene, arrived in the storm's wake. Henry's affection for her was deep and powerful, a refuge of hope following Anne's bloody downfall. At last, Jane delivered the longed-for son Edward, but the price was brutal. She died days later, her memory forever gilded by the achievement that eluded her predecessors. Anne of Cleves, a political bride from Germany, soon followed. The marriage, arranged by portrait and promise, collapsed on first meeting the king. Disappointed by her appearance and manners, cast her aside within months. Unlike others, Anne survived, emerging from the disaster as the king's beloved sister. a rare escapee from the tyrant's lethal affections. Catherine Howard, luminous and heartbreakingly young, was next. Groomed for seduction by the scheming Howard family, she briefly rekindled Henry's fading passions. But her dalliances born, perhaps of loneliness and desperation, were discovered. The king, now old and ominous, unleashed unthinkable punishment. Catherine was executed, pleading for mercy and forgiveness. Her tragedy an echo of Anne's. Finally came Catherine Parra, widow twice over, scholar and gentle nurse. Catherine navigated the lethal currents of Henry's court with wisdom, steering the ailing, suspicious king toward reconciliation with his daughters. A survivor and diplomat, she managed to soothe the old lion toward the twilight of his rule. Each wife bore her hope, her heartache, and her fate, but all shared the mark of the tyrant king. Through them, we witnessed the full spectrum of Henry's passion, from aching tenderness to cold execution. In loving Henry VIII, each woman became a mirror for his soul, reflecting both his longing and his cruelty, his yearning for love and his terror of weakness. Their stories, tender and terrifying, became the very blood and bone of a reign scarred by love, betrayal, and the inexorable pull of death. Chapter 5. The Shadowed Court: Advisors, Foes, and Fatal Alliances. Within the labyrinthine corridors of Henry VIII's court, power was a mask worn by many and trusted by none. The king's appetite for control demanded loyal advisors and vicious enforcers. But trust in this venomous garden was a currency spent. Fast, and most often, fatally. Thomas Wolsey was the realm's first master craftsman of Henry's will, a man whose rise from butcher's son to cardinal mirrored England's tumultuous ascent. Gifted, arrogant, and endlessly resourceful, Wolsey navigated diplomacy, wealth, and policy with the ease of a born survivor. In his glittering palaces, Wolsey outshone most princes, yet none were safe from the shadow of the king's malice when ambition faltered. When Wolsey failed to deliver the annulment from Catherine, his fall was instant and total. Property seized, status gone, death by heartbreak before the axe could claim his head. Into this vacuum rose Thomas Cromwell, a blacksmith's son whose ferocious intellect and remorseless efficiency would change the face of England. Cromwell, wily and calculating, became the architect of the Reformation, orchestrating the dissolution of the monasteries, filling Henry's coffers and courts with a new breed of bureaucrat. Yet even Cromwell, who bent the kingdom to the king's every whim, fell victim to the turbulent tides of favor. His enemies whispered, his allies deserted him, and after arranging the calamitous marriage to Anne of Cleves, Cromwell met a traitor's end, betrayed and alone. The king's mistrust gnawed at every bond. Thomas More, once champion of reason and reform, was cast aside and executed for refusing to affirm Henry as head of the church. Nobles lived in dread, compelled to display allegiance on pain of death. Old houses like the Poles and Howards saw their scions imprisoned, the axe descending without warning, old bloodlines drained to feed the insatiable crown. Yet the court was not merely a tapestry of terror. It was a fevered theater where wit, beauty, and ambition could transform a life overnight. Jane Seymour rose from lady-in-waiting to queen. The Bullens, the Seymours, the Howards each played desperate games for the king's fleeting favor. Poets, artists, and reformers flourished amidst terror, the candle of culture burning ever brighter, if only to hold at bay the encroaching darkness. Alliances at Henry's court were ever shifting, every handshake and promise tainted by the taste of betrayal. Friends became foes overnight, and loyalty was as perishable as youth. Some played the game and won. Most lost their heads. By the twilight of Henry's reign, the royal court teetered on a knife edge, dazzling and dangerous. Beneath the golden tapestries, bloodstains never quite faded, and every smile masked a trembling heart. To serve the tyrant king was to sacrifice peace, certainty, and often one's life. It was a dance on broken glass, played to the tune of his towering will, a melody of ambition, terror, and always heartbreak. Chapter 6. Reformation and Ruin. Faith Torn Asunder. The year is 1534. The chill of a London winter bites deep, but it is a coldness mirrored by the growing discontent simmering within the heart of England. King Henry VIII, once the stalwart defender of the Catholic faith, now stands poised to shatter centuries of tradition, driven by a potent cocktail of ambition, lust, and a desperate need for a male heir. This is not merely a political maneuver. It is a cataclysm that will irrevocably alter the religious and social landscape of England, leaving a trail of blood, betrayal, and spiritual devastation in its wake. The seeds of this seismic shift were sown, of course, in the king's relentless pursuit of Anne Boleyn. Catherine of Aragon, a queen proven barren of male issue, stood as an insurmountable obstacle. Rome, entrenched in its authority and unwavering in its support of Catherine, refused to grant the annulment Henry so desperately craved. But Henry, Tudor, was not a man accustomed to being denied. The refusal fueled a growing resentment, a simmering anger that would soon erupt into open defiance. Henry, guided by the shrewd pragmatism of Thomas Cromwell, embarked on a calculated dismantling of papal authority within England. Parliament, increasingly cowed by the king's iron will, became the instrument of his revolution. One act after another chipped away at the church's power, restricting the flow of funds to Rome, curtailing the jurisdiction of ecclesiastical courts, and ultimately declaring Henry the supreme head of the Church of England. The Act of Supremacy, passed in 1534, was the hammer blow that shattered the unity of Western Christendom. It was a declaration of independence from Rome, a bold assertion of royal sovereignty over all matters, both temporal and spiritual, within England. To refuse to acknowledge the king's supremacy was now an act of treason, punishable by death. Repercussions were immediate and brutal. Loyal Catholics, men and women of unwavering faith, were forced to choose between their conscience and their lives. Thomas More, the former Lord Chancellor and a man of unshakable integrity, stands as the most poignant example of this tragic dilemma. He refused to swear the oath acknowledging Henry's supremacy, choosing instead to face the executioner's axe rather than betray his beliefs. His death, along with that of Bishop John Fisher, sent a chilling message throughout the kingdom. Dissent would not be tolerated. The dissolution of the monasteries followed swiftly. Motivated by a desire to consolidate power, seize vast wealth, and eliminate potential centers of resistance, Henry systematically closed down hundreds of monasteries across England. These institutions, once centers of learning, charity, and spiritual refuge, were stripped of their assets, their lands confiscated, and their monks and nuns cast adrift. The impact on local communities was devastating, as the monasteries provided vital social services, employment, and economic support. The dissolution was justified by claims of widespread corruption and moral decay within the monastic orders. While some abuses undoubtedly existed, the scale of the accusations was grossly exaggerated to serve the king's purposes. Commissioners, often motivated by personal gain, compiled damning reports that painted a picture of monasteries rife with vice and immorality. The wealth acquired from the monasteries poured into the royal coffers, bolstering Henry's power and funding his extravagant lifestyle. However, it also fueled resentment among the common people, many of whom had relied on the monasteries for their livelihoods. This discontent would eventually erupt in the Pilgrimage of Grace, a major rebellion in northern England, fueled by religious grievances and economic hardship. The Pilgrimage of Grace, led by Robert Aske, posed a serious threat to Henry's authority. Thousands of commoners, gentry, and even some members of the clergy rallied under the banner of the old faith, demanding the restoration of the monasteries and the removal of Cromwell from power. Henry, initially feigning negotiations, eventually crushed the rebellion with ruthless efficiency. Its leaders, including Aske, were brutally executed, and the North was brought under tighter royal control. The English Reformation was not a popular movement. It was imposed from above, driven by the will of a single powerful man. It tore apart the fabric of English society, creating deep divisions that would last for generations. It was a period of immense upheaval, religious persecution, and the destruction of centuries-old traditions. Henry's pursuit of personal gratification had unleashed a storm of religious and social unrest, forever changing the course of English history. Chapter 7. The Twilight of a Tyrant, Decline and Desperation. The great hall at Whitehall Palace, once a scene of vibrant feasts and boisterous celebrations, now feels heavy with a palpable sense of dread. The air is thick with the cloying scent of incense, meant to mask the stench of sickness that clings. To King Henry VIII, the king, now in his late 40s, is a shadow of his former self. His once athletic frame is bloated and unwieldy, burdened by layers of fat and ravaged by chronic pain. A festering ulcer on his leg, a constant source of agony, refuses to heal, a visible manifestation of the decay that is consuming him from within. The wives, or rather the memory of them, haunt the darkened corridors of the king's mind. Anne Boleyn, the spark that ignited the Reformation, had her head severed on the executioner's block for alleged treason and adultery. Jane Seymour, the only one to give him a son, died within days of childbirth. Anne of Cleves, the politically advantageous but aesthetically displeasing bride, was swiftly divorced. Catherine Howard, young and vivacious, was another victim of the axe for infidelity. And now, Catherine Parr, a woman of intelligence and Protestant leanings, serves as his nurse, his companion, and perhaps his last hope. Henry's temper, always volatile, has become even more unpredictable in his declining years. His paranoia has deepened, fueled by the constant whispers of courtiers vying for power and influence. Suspicions fester, turning friends into enemies, and even the slightest perceived slight can trigger a deadly rage. The court is a dangerous place, a viper's nest of ambition and intrigue. Thomas Cromwell, the architect of the Reformation and Henry's most trusted advisor, fell victim to the machinations of his enemies. Accused of treason and heresy, he was condemned without a fair trial and executed in 1540, a brutal end for the man who had served Henry so loyally. His demise serves as a chilling reminder of the king's ruthlessness and the precariousness of power. The Duke of Norfolk, a powerful and influential nobleman, finds himself embroiled in a web of accusations. His son, the Earl of Surrey, a celebrated poet and soldier, is accused of treasonous ambition. His niece, Catherine Howard, had already suffered the ultimate penalty for her indiscretions. Norfolk, weakened by age and illness, is imprisoned in the Tower, awaiting his fate. The king's health continues to deteriorate. His leg ulcer festers, causing him unbearable pain. He is plagued by gout, making it difficult for him to walk. His weight balloons, making him increasingly immobile and dependent on others. The once virile and imposing king is now a frail and weakened figure, reliant on the care of his wife and the ministrations of physicians. Despite his physical decline, Henry's grip on power remains absolute. He continues to rule with an iron fist, brooking no dissent and punishing any perceived threat with swift and brutal efficiency. The paranoia that grips him fuels a reign of terror, where accusations are enough to condemn and executions are commonplace. The question of succession weighs heavily on Henry's mind. Edward, his only son, is still a child, and his health is uncertain. Mary, his daughter by Catherine of Aragon, is a devout Catholic, a potential threat to the Protestant Reformation. Elizabeth, his daughter by Anne Boleyn, is intelligent and ambitious, but her legitimacy is still questioned by some. Henry, desperate to secure the Tudor dynasty, makes arrangements for a council of regency to rule in Edward's name until he comes of age. He names a diverse group of advisors, representing different factions within the court, hoping to ensure stability and prevent any one group from seizing control. As death draws near, Henry's thoughts turn to the afterlife. He commissions elaborate funeral arrangements, ensuring that his body will be laid to rest in a magnificent tomb, befitting a king. He clings to the hope that his legacy will be one of strength and power, that he will be remembered as the king who brought England into a new era of prosperity and independence. But as he lies on his deathbed, surrounded by his courtiers and attended by his physicians, Henry must surely have known that his reign had been one of both triumph and tragedy. He had defied the Pope, seized control of the Church, and made England a force to be reckoned with on the world stage. But he had also unleashed a storm of religious and social unrest, executed 2 of his wives, and left a legacy of fear and division. The twilight of the tyrant had arrived, and as the shadows closed in, Henry Tudor, the 8th of his name, faced the ultimate reckoning. Chapter 8. Legacy of Shadows. England after the Tyrant King. January 28, 1547. The death knell tolls from the bell tower of Westminster Abbey, its somber tones echoing across London, signaling the end of an era. King Henry VIII, the towering figure who dominated England for nearly 4 decades, is dead. His reign, marked by both unprecedented power and ruthless tyranny, has come to an end, leaving behind a kingdom teetering on the brink of uncertainty. The news spreads like wildfire, greeted with a mixture of grief, relief, and trepidation. For some, Henry was a savior, a king who liberated England from the shackles of papal authority and ushered in an age of prosperity. For others, he was a monster, a tyrant who ruled through fear and bloodshed, destroying ancient traditions and persecuting those who dared to oppose him. The young King Edward VI ascended to the throne, a frail and pious boy of 9 years old. The Council of Regency, established by Henry in his will, assumes control of the government, but the factions within the court quickly begin to jockey for power. The Seymour family, led by Edward's uncle, Edward Seymour, the Duke of Somerset, emerges as the dominant force, effectively ruling England in the young king's name. The reign of Edward VI is marked by a further acceleration of the Protestant Reformation. Somerset, a staunch Protestant, pushes through radical religious reforms, abolishing Catholic rituals, dismantling altars, and introducing the Book of Common Prayer, a Protestant liturgy written in English. These reforms are met with resistance from conservative elements within the population, particularly in the rural areas, where traditional Catholic beliefs remain strong. The Western Rebellion, also known as the Prayer Book Rebellion, erupts in Cornwall and Devon, fueled by religious grievances and economic hardship. The rebels demand the restoration of the old faith, but the rebellion is brutally suppressed by government forces. Somerset's policies also led to social and economic unrest. His enclosure policies, which convert common land into private property, displace many farmers and laborers, leading to widespread poverty and resentment. His government is also plagued by corruption and mismanagement, further fueling discontent. In 1549, Somerset was overthrown in a palace coup, orchestrated by John Dudley, the Earl of Warwick. Dudley, a ruthless and ambitious politician, becomes the new power behind the throne, ruling England with an iron fist. He continues the Protestant Reformation, but his primary focus is on consolidating his power and enriching himself and his. Allies. Edward VI, despite his youth, is a devout and intelligent king. He takes a keen interest in matters of state and actively supports the Protestant Reformation. However, his health is failing, and it becomes clear that he will not live long enough to produce an heir as Edward's health deteriorates. Dudley schemes to secure the succession for his own family. He persuades the dying king to disinherit his sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, and name Lady Jane Grey, Dudley's daughter-in-law, as his heir. Lady Jane, a devout Protestant and a distant relative of the Tudors, is proclaimed queen upon Edward's death in 1553. However, Lady Jane's reign is short-lived. Mary Tudor, the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, rallies support for her claim to the throne. A wave of popular support sweeps across England, and Mary is proclaimed queen, just 9 days after Lady Jane's ascension. Mary, a devout Catholic, is determined to restore the old faith to England. She marries Philip II of Spain, a staunch Catholic monarch, and embarks on a campaign of religious persecution, earning hundreds of Protestants at the stake. Her actions earn her the nickname Bloody Mary. Mary's reign is marked by religious conflict, political instability, and economic hardship. Her marriage to Philip is unpopular, and England becomes embroiled in costly and unsuccessful wars with France. Her attempts to restore Catholicism are met with resistance from a significant portion of the population. Upon Mary's death in 1558, Elizabeth I, the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, ascended to the throne. Elizabeth, a shrewd and pragmatic ruler, navigates the religious divisions within England with skill and diplomacy. She establishes a moderate Protestant church, which becomes the Church of England, satisfying both Protestant and Catholic elements within the population. Elizabeth's reign is marked by a period of unprecedented prosperity, cultural flourishing, and national unity. She defeats the Spanish Armada, establishing England as a major naval power. She encourages exploration and colonization, laying the foundation for the British Empire. Henry VIII's legacy is complex and contradictory. He was a powerful and charismatic king who transformed England, but he was also a ruthless tyrant who left a trail of blood and division in his wake. His actions had profound and lasting consequences for England, shaping its religious, political, and social landscape for centuries to come. The shadows of his reign continued to linger long after his death, a reminder of the enduring power of a king and the devastating consequences of tyranny. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button to support the channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an audiobook that could change your life now. Let's begin. Enjoy.